Welcome to Norse Code, episode 135, which I understand I incorrectly numbered last time. I have a hard time keeping track now that there's been so many. At any rate, I am still your host for some reason, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me this week, Vikings blogger extraordinaire and in 50 days, training camp goer to report, not to perform, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, I totally forgot that I wouldn't be performing at training camp, just merely reporting.
Well, in the event that this is, and it seems like we're getting like the occasional first-time listener, 3.5 seasons in, so just want to make clear that you are not going to be a player or even trying out for the practice squad this season.
We need to make it clear that the host of this podcast is not
a player.
Is not like a bottom of the roster training camp goer.
Well, it's just for clarity's sake. Joining us also is host of the F-Ball NFL podcast, a writer for NFL.com and Sports on Earth as well, Andrea Hangst. How you doing, Andrea?
Hey, correction, no NFL.com.
Oh, no
I
NFL?
cover the NFL.
Oh, NFL writer.
Yes.
At Sports on Earth.
I'm at Sports on Earth and The Comeback, and I also covered the Cleveland Browns at Scout.com.
Ah, there we go.
The Comeback. That's with Ty Shelter, right?
Yeah, Ty's over there now, yeah.
It's like the new thing from the people who did Awful Announcing, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's nice to be reunited with Ty. We worked together for a few years, well, virtually together, as it were, right, for a few years at Bleacher Report. So it's always good. A lot of the places I write for, a lot of my old crew from Bleacher Report shows up there, and I think it's really great. We really
OG Bleacher Report.
Yeah, we did something with our lives.
Well, be sure to check out the F-Ball podcast at fball.podomatic.com. It is a phenomenal show, and here at Norse Code, we pride ourselves on getting guests that are more talented than the hosts, and this is yet another case where we are fighting above our weight class, and you, regrettably, are punching down. So thank you so much for being on the show.
I don't know about that, but yeah, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. Real pleasure.
Awesome. None of this would be possible without the support of our dedicated listenership. We've had a pretty impressive streak of people contributing to the show in the doldrums of the season, the part of the season where I have to bring like a gallon of water into my boiling hot studio with me as we count down the days to training camp. Nevertheless, Klaus Bebe contributes a $20 donation via PayPal with the note, "Don't spend it all on candy or drugs. Go half on each. Thanks for doing Norse Code." Which I think Klaus gets us. I think his comment encapsulates the blend of irresponsibility and irreverence that we try to bring to every episode of Norse Code.
Yes, truly we're the Johnny Manziel of podcasts. Wait, no, that's bad. No, crap.
Well, now we're the Plexico'd Burris and possibly Aqib Talib of podcasts. Having just shot ourselves in the foot. Quick reminder, 50 days until training camp, which means you've got slightly more than 50 days to prepare your wallets and your eyes for the impressive training camp guide written by generally useful human Arif Hassan. So start skipping those lattes now, because this guide, like last year's and the years before it, is not to be missed.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I should probably get started on it, but yeah, no. If you haven't read the guide before, it's 100+ pages of like scouting reports and like film analysis of the Vikings and like a preview of what to watch for in training camp and stuff like that. A lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. An opportunity to generate some extra digital multimedia content, although this is primarily for your eyeballs. Let us proceed to the interview, the real meat of this adventure. I thought, since we have somebody who is, I guess, kind of Andrea, you focus primarily on the Browns, but you write kind of about the NFL in general. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. When I started out, it was the NFL in general, and then I moved to AFC North as a whole, and then to Steelers, Browns, and the entire NFL again. So now it's just it's a mishmash of everything, which is great because while I enjoyed being so AFC North focused for so many years, it's nice to, there's 32 teams now open to for me to look at and break down and pay attention to, and I don't have to just hone in on those four.
It's true, and there's at least one conference that is guaranteed to field a generally worse slate of competitors than the AFC North.
Right. It's always, at least the AFC North is exciting. That's for sure. I mean, it could be worse, but and the intense rivalries and the way that all of those teams are just so interrelated.
I love that about the AFC North. Like, just like the histories of all the teams are so tied together.
Yes, absolutely. And so while that was fun, it is nice to be able to share my thoughts on all 32.
Well, so you were talking this week on your podcast about kind of the quarterback situation coming into the 2016 season, and although your discussion was fairly exhaustive, was there anything you wanted to maybe use this as a springboard for? Any unfinished thoughts that you had about the state of quarterbacking before the season starts?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of desperation out there, which is just something we see all the time. Whether we like it or not, the quarterback position is viewed as the most important. Sometimes it is. I mean, it depends on how a team is built and what the coaching and offensive philosophies are. But teams, they get whipped up into a frenzy almost, it seems. When you see certain quarterbacks being drafted in the first round that ultimately don't pan out after 4 years and then they're thrown into the fire, and then you wonder, why was he even drafted in the first round anyway? And it's just that these teams are so afraid of not having a quarterback that they think that they can trust. And I think that's part of the situation. For example, Brock Osweiler getting $72 million for 7 starts. I mean, this is, we're talking almost Matt Flynn kind of stuff here. But Brock Osweiler didn't throw 5 or 6 touchdowns against the Lions in week 17.
Right. Yeah, they were not like 7 particularly good starts either. Yeah.
Right. 7 fairly mediocre, semi-promising starts, but also we're talking about him quarterbacking a team that had a stellar defense and a very effective run game that could help him out, take that pressure on him. And while there is a good defense in Houston and a run game that they're trying to get back together, it's not the equivalent of what he experienced in Denver. So I'm very curious as to how desperate they got, and someone would have paid him something like that anyway if it wasn't Houston, because teams again are desperate. And then you have the other side of the coin where we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs waiting for the New York Jets and Ryan Fitzpatrick to stop this bizarre stalemate that never had to happen. Ryan Fitzpatrick is not going to set the world on fire. He's 33 years old, for all intents and purposes a journeyman, but he has found success with the New York Jets. He had the top receiving tandem in the league last year with Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, 2 guys and plus veterans on the offensive line who've been very vocal about wanting the Jets to re-sign Fitzpatrick and get this deal done. And that they would kind of insult him with the continuous lowballing, and now they're quibbling over, is it $12.5 million guaranteed but a 1-year deal or a multi-year deal? It's just something that should have been done by now. This is not a complicated situation. Your option is Geno Smith or Christian Hackenberg, and you had relative success with Fitzpatrick last year on the verge of the playoffs and all of that. So, on the one side you go, geez, the Texans really overpaid for some guy with not a lot of experience. And on the other side, you have, wow, the Jets won't pay even just under market rate for a guy who's been around the league and played relatively well for quite a few years.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that because you were talking about like how, desperate quarterbacks are around the league. And like my first thought was actually the Jets, because I don't know, to me, they're also kind of like a paradox, because it felt like to me that they way overdrafted Christian Hackenberg, which I think underscores, the point about how, people might be desperate for quarterbacks and reach. But at the other end, you're right. Like this Fitzpatrick situation is, it's kind of ludicrous. It's like pretty absurd. They don't have a starting quarterback. And so for them to continue to engage in this stalemate, it's like really weird. It's like anti-desperation. And so, yeah, I was actually pretty happy that you brought them up because I wanted to know, like, sort of your take. Like, do you think that the Jets are being ridiculous? Do you think that Fitzpatrick is being ridiculous? Do you respect the Jets for maybe not, like, falling forward and overpaying Fitzpatrick? Because, I mean, you're right. Like, he performed pretty well. But I think a lot of that has to do with what you're saying with the, a pretty good offensive line, the best receiver tandem in the league. I think I definitely agree with you on that, by the way. That Eric Decker is massively underrated. Brandon Marshall is fantastic, and they're both accuracy erasers and stuff like that. And so if Fitzpatrick is, maybe not the bee's knees at quarterback, like maybe the Jets are doing the right thing at resisting this move to desperation at quarterback, because I don't see Fitzpatrick getting a deal anywhere else. And so ultimately I see him starting for the Jets in week 1. So maybe they did a good thing.
Well, I mean, I understand that they wanted to be patient with getting a deal done with Fitzpatrick, and I understand the idea of there being no hurry. Mini camps are just happening this week, and really the meat of everything, especially if you're talking about a quarterback that was in this system last year, already has connections with his receivers and such, that they could, try to extend this out until training camp. The problem there is A, patience is a virtue only up until a certain point, because then you're starting to ruffle the feathers of some other veteran leadership on that offense. And at some point, the deal is not getting done for strange. There's obviously something odd going on here that also just doesn't seem necessary. And it's one thing to wait it out and not overpay, right at the start of free agency and look like you're desperate for Ryan Fitzpatrick. But at the same time, have a starting quarterback. I mean, why wait till July? Why don't wait until June, like now, or late May, or 2 weeks after the draft? I don't understand dragging this out this long. There's only so much of a point where being patient is making the Jets look smarter in this situation.
Maybe I'm not like a bargaining expert or a market expert, but I feel like this situation has gone on so long that now Fitzpatrick and the Jets kind of have to stare at each other until someone relents. Like it's gone on for too long to anyone to capitulate, and the status of these negotiations is screwing up negotiations with any other people that the Jets might be interested in, and so they're like locked in this staring match until someone relents. Does that seem like an accurate perception?
Yeah, definitely accurate. And right now it's still pretty tense, and I completely understand the frustrations of Jets players and Jets fans alike that this hasn't gotten done yet. I wouldn't start worrying if we're creeping into mid-July and it's still a definite stalemate situation going on here. But personally, I just think it's very strange and counterproductive, I think, to what the Jets overall are trying to do as a team, especially this time of year, to not put their foot down and get this done one way or the other.
So would you classify this as possibly the largest disappointment / confusing thing about the offseason thus far?
It's definitely one of the most confusing. And it's been one of these things that's just like been picking at me since free agency started, because I really wanted to see what was going to come of this, just because of everything that Fitzpatrick and that everything they kind of built up together on that offense in 2015. So this has been sort of like my little pet project of what is going on with Fitzpatrick. So I would say it's one of the more confusing things. There are a lot of things that to me seemed a little bit off this offseason, particularly when it comes to free agent veteran signings. There's a lot of strange stuff.
Well, so let's talk about those for a little bit. Like what else? I mean, because I kind of agree with you. It's felt a little bit odd this year, but like what has stood out to you has been like maybe the most unusual. Because I think for me, one of the most underrated, confusing things was Damon Harrison signing with the New York Giants, because to me that just means the New York Giants have 2 nose tackles that are starting for them and no 3 techniques. But that's like that feels like a much smaller confusing thing in like the range of confusing things that could happen in an offseason. But like to you, like what stood out?
I'm confused about the trajectory of DeMarco Murray's career.
That's fair. Yeah.
He had some good years in Dallas, and they couldn't afford to pay him in free agency, a thing that will happen when you're a running back who breaks out to that extent. He goes to Philadelphia. is not used in the same way that he was in Dallas, whether correctly or incorrectly, by Chip Kelly. He's in reports all year that he's unhappy with Chip Kelly, unhappy with Chip Kelly. Kelly's gone. They're trying to revert the Eagles to like where they were trying to basically hit reset on the pre-Chip Kelly era and seem to want DeMarco Murray to be a part of that, but then he still remained dissatisfied and then gets traded to Tennessee, who already have some backs in the fold, and then they draft Derrick Henry. And I just feel like we're going to, like, in November, when the Titans are, you know, a 1 or 2 win team again, not, you know, I'm sorry. It's just, I just don't see it. And that's on me. Hey, if they win 11 games next year, I'll be wrong and I'll take it. But when that happens, are we going to hear more rumblings of dissatisfaction of DeMarco Murray? Because he had some leverage, and now his leverage is slipping and slipping and slipping away. And leverage is really hard to attain for a running back to begin with, a running back that's had some injuries, and he's kind of losing that leverage. So I'm really curious to see what happens with Tennessee, how often he's carrying the ball, getting touches compared to everybody else there, and what does that mean for his contentment with now his third team.
Well, so there's an adage like bad teams stay bad, because, and most of that has to do with like organizational dysfunction at the very top, the ownership kind of trickling down. And, you know, the Titans are sort of one of the examples of a bad team staying bad. And I think that this sort of situation, if you will, with DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry, and, you know, I think David Cobb is good. Evidently, the Titans disagree. You know, I think is maybe a good example of that. Why did the Titans why did they give up assets to get DeMarco Murray?
I have no idea. I would say maybe, I mean, there was a time, was there not, when Jim Irsay and Ryan Grigson gave up a first-round draft pick to get Trent Richardson from the Cleveland Browns. So all kinds of weird things happen. And I think it's just one of those weird things where it's just going to be like, oh, here's another stupid thing that the Titans did in the 2010s, you know, that you know, set the franchise back, and they couldn't do anything until 2019 or something. You know what I mean? And I think it's just one of those things, you know, where you look at somebody's stats from a couple of years ago and say, that guy can do this thing. And it's like, yeah, a few regimes ago you had a guy that could do those things too, in Chris Johnson. But here's the other thing about DeMarco Murray. He's a very good runner, but it works even better behind a good offensive line, and your offensive line is highly questionable. And, you know, are you going to have an effective run game? How much are you going to really rely on that run game? I mean, you would think that they're going to be run heavy, trading for DeMarco Murray, drafting Derrick Henry, all of this. But at the same time, will they be successful at doing so? And what does that mean for Marcus Mariota in his second year? You know, because I worry that if the Titans keep trotting down the path that they have over the past couple of seasons, Marcus Mariota is going to be the next Jake Locker and stop loving the game and retire, you know, because it's not worth it.
Jeez. I know. I mean, that's pretty fair. Tennessee is one of the few teams that regularly carries like a fullback. They have 2 heading into training camp, so I think it's maybe a good instinct to say they're probably going to be run heavy. And, you know, this is something that, you know, Vikings fans have kind of like wrestled with. Like, you've got a young quarterback who you want to develop. Maybe
protect him.
Right.
And the run game will protect him.
Do you think that's like? Do you think that that's a smart strategy, or do you think that like they should have? Maybe the Colts are not the best example of a team that's being built well, but do you think that they should just like do what the Colts did and just like have the rookie quarterback just throw as many times as possible, learn from every single throw in a way? Like, because I mean, the Vikings, they had the fewest throws in the NFL. The number 1 team had like 600 plus throws. The Vikings had like 450. Mm-hmm. Do you think that like if you've got a run heavy offense, you're stunting the development of your quarterback? Do you think that like what the Titans are doing makes sense from like, maybe it doesn't make sense from like an individual move perspective, but like philosophically building a run heavy offense around a new quarterback? Do you think that makes sense, or do you think they should just like have the quarterback bear the burden?
You know, I think it really makes sense to be able to take that time to develop a quarterback while protecting him with a run game. Because let's say in this hypothetical situation, what we're talking about here is a first-round drafted quarterback. And unless you have significant off-field problems like Johnny Manziel, even not even significant injuries, because you see that Sam Bradford's still in the league, but you have significant problems like someone like Johnny Manziel. A team is not going to be cutting their first-round drafted quarterback within his rookie contract. So you're buying time. You're not just getting this quarterback that you hope develops into your guy for the future. You're buying the time that it takes to get there, 4 or 5 years if you exercise this fifth-year option. So what you can do is put him out there if you need to start him as a rookie. You can put him out there, and if you have a strong run game, that protects him, and then you can ramp up his throwing in his quantity of throws, if you will, over the next couple of seasons, because you have time. Ostensibly, you would have those 4 to 5 years to get him to the point where you want him to be. And I think that there's a way that you can ramp it up when you have a strong run game. I think that there are some quarterbacks who could be suited to high volume passing as a rookie, but those are seeming to become fewer and further between. And I don't think that taking a first round quarterback and putting his feet to the fire, especially in a situation where you're trying to have a run game and then you're failing, and then you're just putting him in this quarterback in this situation that you never even intended for him. And that's a situation where, there's going to be mistakes made, he's going to panic, it's going to be a little bit awkward. So I think that if you have the capacity, you have that good run game, that you can use that as a tool to develop your quarterback, because you have 4 to 5 years with him.
Well, no, see, I think of it as a situation where the Titans are so excited about pursuing a run-first offense in a league that doesn't really want that anymore. They are willing to sacrifice their quarterback's love of football to get it.
Well, I don't know. Well, there's the inverse to that too, because you can look at the Seattle Seahawks and Russell Wilson and how run-heavy an offense that has been over the years. And granted, Wilson has been part of that, and that's not really the case with Mariota. But at the same time, you can win a Super Bowl and rank 32 in passes attempted in the year. It just depends on how you're built and how well you're able to run that vision and create that vision that your coaches put together, and if the players stay healthy and all of those other variables that you can't predict. But you can look at things on paper to an extent this time of year, especially if we're talking early June, and go, I don't know what's going on with Tennessee, especially, I guess they want to run the ball, but will they be able to?
Well, that's fair. Let's shift from sort of the most confusing or most maybe easy to criticize moves of the offseason. What do you think were the moves that, not necessarily the best moves, but moves that made the most sense in the offseason? You were yes, that totally fits everything I know about that organization, everything about what they need to do, etc. Is it maybe the Cowboys drafting Ezekiel Elliott? Maybe it's the Patriots trading for Martellus Bennett? What do you think is what move made just perfect sense based off of what you would have predicted in the offseason?
I like the entire approach the Jacksonville Jaguars have taken to the entire offseason. Jalen Ramsey and Myles Jack in the draft, Malik Jackson, Tashawn Gibson, Prince Amukamara in free agency. Dante Fowler is coming back from his injury that cost him his rookie season. It's clear that they're loading up on defense, and it makes complete sense because, over the past few years, everybody says it's sort of been waiting for that big Jaguars defensive breakout. And we haven't really seen it. And now they're loaded up with enough talent that if these guys can come together as a unit on the field, when looking at Jacksonville's offense last year with Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson, that's becoming a very explosive offense. And if you can have a defense that can kind of match that intensity, this could be a beginning of a renaissance for the Jaguars. Granted, this is something I've said for years, but, this is a team that I think with this offseason, they turned that corner. And at the same time, they were one of a couple of teams that were were above the cap floor or below, whatever. They couldn't meet the cap floor. And they had a lot of money to spend, so they went out and spent it, but they didn't spend it in a ridiculous manner. They got players that made sense for what they needed and didn't just exactly throw money around. And so I really like what they put together this offseason. It's just a matter of when you bring in that many new moving parts, starters to your defense, is getting them all on the same page within the off season, within summertime, within the training camp. So that's going to be the big challenge there.
I totally forgot about the Amukamara signing. That's a pretty fantastic move, and I would say probably the Giants had a pretty poor offseason in part because they replaced Amukamara with Jenkins. They added. I think they overpaid for Olivier Vernon. But yeah, no, I think you're right that Jacksonville had a pretty phenomenal offseason. Julius Thomas also, like if we want to switch to the offensive side real quick, Julius Thomas, I think, him being healthy throughout the offseason and entering the season, hopefully will, I think, be a big boon. And they've locked up Hearns to have Allen Robinson. And I think maybe another sneaky good move, signing Kelvin Beachum. To potentially compete with Luke Joeckel. Yeah, so
it looks like he's going to take over for Luke Joeckel because if you look at the amount of money on that contract, which is it's not an insane contract, 5 years, $45 million. It's not actually $9 million a year on average, of course.
Right.
But it is the kind of contract that signals, especially at the same time that the Jaguars are not picking up that 5th-year option on Joeckel, that it's backup time for him.
Yeah. Well, as Vikings fans, I kind of know the feeling of what should be backup time. We'll probably see in regards to Matt Club. But yeah, I think, with how good the interior line for the Jaguars can be, and adding, someone to protect the edge, adding another, or maybe not adding another weapon, but like building on a weapon that they built there, adding Amukamara and Gibson, who I think are both underrated players at this point. Having Ramsey and potentially Jack, I mean, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch develop. And I think the flip side of that, of course, is that Gus Bradley doesn't really have any excuses this year, right? I mean, especially because the schedule is pretty weak.
The schedule is pretty weak, and people have been saying that there's no excuses for Gus Bradley for this is what going on in the third offseason, but this is the actual time where he doesn't have the excuses.
But now it's emphatically true.
Right, because they are very productive on offense. Blake Bortles looks like a guy who could be their quarterback for a really long time. They've got a pair of receivers who could be there for the long term. The tight end's healthy now, and then they load up on defense, and then 4 wins. That's going to be a problem if that comes to pass. So hopefully Jaguars can do something 8-8 or better and find something to build upon and keep the chemistry flowing between coaching and playing.
Yeah, I saw something like 5-1 odds at some point in the offseason of the Jaguars winning the division. This is not a gambling podcast, but I would say that I might have taken that. I think those are pretty good odds given that division.
True.
Yeah, so would you say the Jaguars had the best offseason out of all the teams so far? Or is there another team that you think, like maybe the Chicago Bears, they had a great offseason. The Patriots consistently have pretty good offseasons. Who do you think, and this includes the draft, who do you think had the best offseason?
Chicago Bears had a really good offseason. I liked a lot of the things they did. And I also like a lot of what the Oakland Raiders did. Coleccio Semele coming on, Bruce Irvin, Reggie Nelson, drafting a safety and Carl Joseph in round 1 who they really, really needed. I think that's all. I think it's almost on the same lines as what the Jaguars did in terms of, they bring in Semele to help on the offensive line, but then they spend a lot of attention on the defense because, again, sort of like the Jaguars with Derek Carr and Amari Cooper and all this they're building out there, the offense is starting to look really sharp, and now you just have to get the defense. You have Khalil Mack up front, and he's a beast, but add another beast up front, add some help in the secondary, and then build a well-rounded defense that, maybe could remind one of somebody else in that division, the Denver Broncos.
So speaking of the Broncos, we talked a little bit about, some of the best and some of the worst. I feel like the Broncos offseason has left them kind of like if you've ever seen like an Audi or a Porsche rolling down the street but the muffler is busted and you can tell the tires are bald. Like, what are they going to do?
I'm going to hope for the best. It's sort of like after the Baltimore Ravens. Well, I mean, I think that they haven't lost a ton. I mean, they've lost a lot of talent, but they haven't lost everything, obviously. But it sort of reminds me of what the Baltimore Ravens did after they won the Super Bowl a couple of years back. The only difference, of course, with the Broncos is they lost their starting quarterback, or the guy that they thought was going to be their starting quarterback after Peyton Manning retired.
Well, it sounds like that was like kind of a mutual split. Like Osweiler didn't even go to the White House when the rest of the Super Bowl winning Broncos
it was
took
mutual,
a trip up there.
And it makes sense that it was mutual because a year ago, this time of year and in the off season, a year ago, all you could hear about was Elway and the front office raving about Osweiler, and they really like the kid, and sort of like, oh yeah, so here's the guy who's going to be the guy after Peyton's not the guy anymore, and then suddenly, he gets some starts and he caretakes a little bit, and then obviously Peyton's healthy, and if Peyton's healthy and it's the playoffs, you put him out there, and I think maybe that left a little sour taste in his mouth. I don't know, but I guess it was pretty clear that afterwards. He thought that he needed that bump in pay after a Super Bowl that he didn't even appear in versus Joe Flacco, who was Super Bowl MVP. And it was just money. And it was money that the Broncos couldn't afford to spend. I mean, I think that they would have loved to be able to afford to, keep Malik Jackson and Brock Osweiler and Danny Trevathan and be able to get a contract or have Von Miller work under the franchise tag this year. But financially, it was not going to happen. They had $18 million in cap space. You're not going to sign all those guys with that amount of money. So they were kind of in a rock and a hard place situation where if they had more cap room, perhaps this wouldn't be the situation. But because they didn't, they had to make some decisions. And overall, so the Von Miller franchise tag, for example, was more important to them than what they believed would be overpaying for Brock Osweiler.
Plus, the cornerback shot himself.
Yeah, he Plaxico'd.
Yeah, he Plaxico'd.
So yeah, let's not. He didn't shoot himself intentionally. So just in case anybody is listening.
Oh yeah, he's not Suicide Watch. It's not. No.
No. He's in two. You know what? And that's. Now that we know that people are investigating it like he accidentally shot himself, I understand why he's saying he's too intoxicated to remember. He wasn't too intoxicated to remember. That's just what you say when you did something super embarrassing that you do not want to admit that you were lucid for. You know what I mean?
No, and then the best part is that now the details of the story are changing. He's like, no, I was too drunk to remember what I was doing, but I was just drunk enough to remember now that I was in a park and not a nightclub.
Now we've got. So he was just sitting in a park, and then he stood up, and then it just Plaxico'd him. Lord,
are we verbing that now? Is Plaxico the official verb for shooting yourself in the foot?
There's no question about that. Yes. If I went to a stranger on a street and was like, "Do you hear that Talib Plaxico'd himself?" Without any context, they would totally know what I'm talking about.
If they knew what football was, they would know exactly what you were talking about.
Talk to strangers in Minnesota.
I've said weird things with Plaxico before. I wrote a headline once that said, "Could Plaxico be Baxico in Pittsburgh?" My editor loved it.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I went there.
Well, let's pivot pretty sharply and talk specifically about the Browns because they're hilarious. But also just Cleveland sports in general. So the 30 for 30. Believe Land came out a month ago. Did you end up watching it?
I did watch it, in fact. I had to check in on the pain and suffering of all of the beautiful Browns fans who have embraced me as one of their own. I mean, I can't say I'm a Browns fan, but I can say I'm not a Browns fan after all these years.
It's difficult to not root for them after covering all of the mistakes for so long, I imagine.
Oh yeah. You want the best for them. It's like a prodigal child or that puppy with all the fleas or something.
Well, what are your thoughts on so personally I'm not a huge fan of Scott Rapp, but in general, what are your thoughts on the 30 for 30?
I think it really focused on hammering home misery, and I don't know. I think it played into what the national cliched thoughts of a Cleveland sports fan.
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah,
okay, but would anyone really believe a hopeful narrative about the Browns?
Yeah. Yeah, the national media perception, for example, of the Browns or what they write about the Browns or whatever is often not what's really going on. It's just let's just fit it in that sad sack narrative. And I think that it's just let's just shove everything into that sad sack narrative. But honestly, there are a few things more dastardly than Art Modell taking the Browns.
Oh yeah.
Out of Cleveland and taking them to Baltimore, and that's coming from somebody who grew up near Pittsburgh. You know what I'm saying? That was
No, that's totally fair. And you don't have to comment on this next point I'm going to make, but I think in general, I think actually the OBR excluded, the Browns beat has not been particularly good at writing about the Browns. Again, you don't have to comment about this. But I think they kind of feed into a lot of this narrative about like, misery and, it's the Browns again. And it's actually easy to gloss over sort of the nuances or the interesting things about what's happening inside the Browns or what's happening with the Browns, because it's like pretty simple to just be like, well, Browns, right?
Browns, right. Well, the only thing I'll say to that is, I've been on the Browns beat for like 5 years, and a lot of these beat reporters have been doing this for, their entire careers for decades. And, and going through regime after regime and hearing the same thing after the same thing from new coach, new quarterback over and over again. And I think it's just easy to get jaded and cynical and kind of worn down in that situation. So I think that if I'm still covering the Browns in 25 years and this keeps happening, I'll probably be way more jaded than I am now. I feel like I'm pretty jaded as a football writer at this point, as it is.
No, you'll totally end up like Agent Smith in The Matrix, being like, you know what I hate the most about this place? It's the smell. It saturates me.
Yeah. Essentially, it's good like that.
The Browns have like maybe the most interesting, maybe not the most interesting, but an interesting to me quarterback situation where they didn't overdraft a quarterback. I mean, maybe they overdrafted Kessler, but like they didn't really. And they brought in RG3. They have like competition, and they've got like competition with like some pretty serious upside without a bunch of investment. So who do you expect to start for the Browns, and what is your take on the way that they've handled the quarterback situation?
As of right now, granted, today was day one of minicamp. No one's got no pads on. Nothing's happening yet. Everybody's essentially throwing against air. But right now, I would think it's either going to be RG3 or Josh McCown who starts week one. Those are the guys with the most experience. Those are the guys who have a lot of trust. I think that RG3 has done a really good job of building relationships and building trust with his coaches and players and fellow players in Cleveland. He learned a lot what to do and what not to do from his time in Washington, and all you can hope for from a player in that situation is that they learn from it. I think that if there's any coach in the National Football League who can get something really positive, I'm not saying 2012 Rookie of the Year kind of RG3, but something really good out of him, it's going to be Hugh Jackson. The only caveat with that is, if Josh McCown becomes an intriguing trade prospect for Denver or the Jets or wherever.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So I think it's an advantageous quarterback situation that's going on there. I think that if the Browns can play their cards right, and I have no reason at this point to not believe that this new group of leadership can't play their parts right, because this is I think the best group they've put together in a really long time. I think that if they play their cards right, they can figure out this quarterback situation, what it's going to be in 2016, and what it might look like in the future.
So I have the suspicion that RG3's kind of locker room antics or, lack of leadership was, partly manufactured or at least inflated by a system in Washington that wanted him to fail. Do you have you seen much like evidence of that or kind of a lack of that in Cleveland? Has he, performed differently than the many media leaks in Washington would have us believe?
He has completely learned from those mistakes, I think. I think it was really humbling for him. He didn't play a single offensive snap. He was playing scout team safety last year for Washington and didn't complain. You know what I mean? I think it was a combination of factors that doomed him in Washington. One, first off, just the trade. The picks they traded to acquire him told him, I'm the man here. Next, you have an enabling and terrible owner in Dan Snyder, who was pulling RG3 aside, spending time with him alone and saying, you are the man here. You are the most important thing that's going on here. At the same time, Mike Shanahan, the head coach at the time, was not having that. And there was basically a battle of egos that shouldn't have been waged to begin with. And, in certain ways, RG3 was his own enemy. And in other ways, the people who were supposed to be developing and protecting him, like Mike Shanahan, didn't like him, or like Dan Snyder, doesn't know how to take care of anything. You know what I mean? He doesn't know how to do what's in the best interest for a specific player, especially when it comes to what he perceives the best interest for the player to be versus what really is the best interest, because he's got to spend time in the locker room with his fellow teammates and how they're going to perceive the preferential treatment and all that stuff that they didn't believe RG3 had even earned. All of these things are completely off the table in Cleveland. There's none of that situation. He's not ordained. He is not anointed. He has not been named a starter. No one's been named a starter, and Hugh Jackson's making it clear he is in no rush, and he shouldn't be. He can just be a football player and learn the system, gain the trust of these guys, and just prove that he is a changed and better quarterback. And from all I've heard, read, and seen at this point, there's nothing to indicate that he's not doing what he needs to do.
No, that's fair. No, I have a lot of trust in Hugh Jackson. I love, obviously, what he did in the offense in Cincinnati. I thought he was underrated as a head coach in Oakland before a regime change pushed him out. And so I think that that's a lot of reason to trust sort of the development of, or the redevelopment maybe of RG3 to him. But another reason I think that's definitely worth noting is the receiver-heavy draft, and it's a lot of really good talent. You've got, I think it's 2014 and 2015 receiving yardage leaders in Higgins and Coleman. You've got spark superstars like Ricardo Lewis and tight end Seth DeValve. So part of the receiving conversation actually is also part of the Moneyball analytics, whatever conversation that's happening with the Browns too, because it seems pretty clear that they at least looked at some measure of statistics when making these draft picks, even with the offensive linemen, Spencer Dranko, Sean Coleman. Mm-hmm. How do you think the conversation about analytics with regards to the Brown has been handled? Because in a lot of ways, it seems like it's being handled by both national and even local media a little bit weirdly, and not that much in depth, but at other times it's been kind of interesting. Like, how do you think that the conversation has been handled?
I think it's been really interesting because it's like analytics is some sort of magical word, and they say it's a focus on analytics, but no one really is going into what that means. And then, Paul DePodesta, Moneyball, and they're going to run a football team like a baseball team or whatever. And it's just, honestly, I mean, this is something that the Browns initiated a couple of years ago back when Mike Lombardi and Joe Banner were running the front office. And it's something that Jimmy Haslam has been interested in from the beginning. And it's essentially just finding the maximum value for your players who can give you the most potential playing time in the short and long terms. And one way to do that, guess what? Amass draft picks. They walked in with 12 and walked out with 14, plus a ton of extra picks next year, plus extra picks in 2018. That's Moneyball.
Yeah, and that was pretty fantastic.
Play the game, Yeah, it's brilliant. And I'm not saying that all 14 of these players that they drafted this year are going to make the 53-man roster and or the practice squad, but when you look at a typical team's draft year by year, they essentially hit 50% of the time. 50% of the guys will last it out for 3 or 4 years. 50% of the guys won't.
Right. Well, so that's part of the theory of acquiring a bunch of draft picks is almost gambling that. Right. Right. Exactly. No one's expecting, especially them, that all 14 picks will pan out, and if they do, more power to them. But they're pricing in the idea. Right. Well, okay. Well, is there any reporting on what Paul DePodesta does, aside from the word analytics? I mean, there's so many things you could integrate data systems. You could do so many things with analytics that have nothing to do with player evaluation. Like you mentioned, the draft is one of them. You could make scouting more efficient by using analytics to determine the best routes as the scouts drive along the highways and stuff like that. You could use analytics to create a cheat sheet for what to do in games on fourth down situations and stuff like that. There's a bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with player evaluation or investing resources into particular players that he could be doing. But has there been any reporting on like what he does?
It's really hard to find a lot of information about what he does because he also doesn't work out of the Browns facility in Berea. He actually works in California, and then he'll commute. He's sort of in almost a consultant type role. You couldn't sit and call him a GM, for example. But he basically it's just overall organizational strategy more than anything, and organizational systems that he's assisting with. More than being specifically, let's do this with this player because this. Even though maybe sometimes he has that input, it's more of a organizational systems consultant, which just sounds like a whole bunch of empty words strung together. So I apologize.
It sounds empty, but I know what you're getting at. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. Are there other people in the organization that are handling data in interesting ways, using data to make decisions besides him?
Oh yeah, there's Sashi Brown, the executive vice president of the football operations. He's obviously very much involved with that. They have some sports science guys. Hugh Jackson was saying today that when he wants to do padded practices during training camp isn't necessarily lining up with what the sports science people they brought on want, but he's adamant that he's been a coach long enough that he knows it's good for players. Sure. So there's a lot of different moving parts going.
But it also means that there's like back and forth, which is what like a lot of people would want to hear, right? Because most of the criticism is if you don't have experience in the thing, how can you just use data to make? But with this back and forth, that's got to be a little bit more comforting.
It's a highly collaborative effort, which is extremely excellent, and they're also bringing guys in, Jim Brown and other veteran players, Browns legends who, previous administrations didn't even want hanging around the facility, which makes zero sense. So it's a more collaborative situation where you're not going to be hearing a lot of biting of, the coach is mad at the GM, that you were hearing a lot back during the Mike Pettin days. It's a much more positive environment for all involved, at least at this point. We'll see what happens once the season starts. Yeah. Because, winning and losing can really change the tenor of a relationship there.
Sure. Well, I think Dusty's pretty antsy to get a really good mailbag question answered. Dusty, you want to take that?
Yeah, it's true. Before we let you go, Andrea, we had one really great question of the two in our mailbag. And Justin Rubin, at Justin M. Rubin on Twitter writes, what qualities define a good NFL organization, and which of those qualities have the Browns lacked in the past? I mean, you talked a little bit about kind of what they're doing now and the people in place that are trying to remedy that situation, but what are those people remedying, I guess?
They're remedying. See, you have to change. If you're a long-standing losing team, you got to change the culture in the locker room where players aren't so accustomed to losing that it doesn't even bother them as much anymore. You get kind of apathetic to it. You have to balance patience with expectations. I think that there's been a lot of quick trigger fingers. When it comes to hiring and firing head coaches and front office people, sometimes it's warranted totally. And that can't be denied, but at some point you have to say, all right, can we, we've had a couple of struggles these past couple of seasons, but do we have to pin this on the head coach? Do we have to pin this on what the GM has done or hasn't done in the draft? And then, and say, no, this is just a process that needs more time. For example, the Browns right now are an extraordinarily young team. They should get more time. So I think, patience is the proper amount and when to exercise patience, whereas to be impatient. I think that striking that balance has been a real struggle for the Browns, and that has carried over into so many different things because once you're turning over a front office and coaching staff, you're changing the way the offense is set up. You're changing up the way the defense is set up. I mean, they were going from 3-4 to 4-3 to 3-4 and back again over the course of 5-6 seasons here recently,
Right, they had like a 1-year tenure and 3 2-year tenures for coaches, right?
Exactly, and so when you're changing up the system, then you're changing up what you're asking a player to do. You're essentially confusing these players with multiple playbooks and philosophies. And then you have a guy who might be a stud at defensive end for this one coach who's a bust at linebacker for this other coach, but he wasn't even drafted to play linebacker. He's drafted to play defensive end. So you have all these previous draft picks that don't fit. You have free agents that don't fit. You have a quarterback who's not, quote unquote, your guy. You have an antsy front office that's, firing without maybe being concerned about, well, would continuity be better here? And it's a vicious cycle that keeps repeating itself. That's the problem.
Well, so that's actually interesting then. So, because you're right that this brings up the question of balance, because they have to be patient, right, with the front office and the coaching staff and allow them not only to get their guys, but to teach their system. Mm-hmm. But then they have to be really decisive about some of these guys that may simply not be system fits because they were drafted, for other systems, like you were saying, sure. Like, a defensive end or a linebacker, or maybe somebody who's like plainly not good, like Justin Gilbert. And so,
hey, like, he's rolling with the first team right now. He's got a shot at redemption. He's got a shot at redemption. No, Joe Hayden had off-season ankle surgery, and he might not even be good to go for training camp. So they have Justin Gilbert in there with the ones. So
that's certainly interesting. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they have to be decisive about some of these players. Some of these players maybe who have shown a lot of talent in the past, but are not good fits for the system right. that they want to run on offense or defense, and so. That has to be agonizing to know you have a good player who just won't be good for you. You have to not be patient with them, because you have to give your opportunity for the best player who will perform for you, right?
Right, and you want them to have opportunities. If they're not going to fit on your roster, why have them try to do a role that they're not suited to do, end up on the bench when somewhere else they could be starting for good money? Why limit their opportunity to play football as well?
Okay, so right before you go, who do you think is the player that maybe best embodies that, who's like a pretty good player but just maybe won't be a fit with what Hugh Jackson wants to do in offense, what Ray Horton wants to do in defense?
That's a good question. I think that there's obviously going to be some odd cornerbacks out. Obviously Josh Gordon and Tramon Williams are still penciled in as starters, but it's going to be interesting to see because and also we talk about maybe Barkevius Mingo. He had a really good year last time Ray Horton was in town, but now it's a completely different situation where also the Browns have drafted some outside linebacking help, and they're putting Paul Kruger back in that rush role. So there's going to be a few guys that are gonna you're gonna want to root for them, and it's not going to fit. Probably receiver Taylor Gabriel because he's one of He's one of two small guys, and the other small guy is Andrew Hawkins, a player that Hugh Jackson knows from his days with the Cincinnati Bengals. And so I think that obviously would give Hawkins the edge over Gabriel. But then again, put the pads on, start catching passes from these quarterbacks, and see who's the best fit.
All right. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show with us, Andrea. Is there anything you want to plug, any pieces you've written recently or anything like that?
Actually, for all you Vikings fans out there, I have a piece dropping tomorrow at the comeback on the Harrison Smith contract extension and what it means for the Vikings cap moving forward and for the safety position in general. So,
do we get maybe a free preview of what you're thinking, or do we have to wait?
You have to wait.
Okay.
That's fair. That gives us license to talk about this on the show without knowing. Yeah. Preserve those clicks.
Oh yeah.
Andrea Hanks can be found writing for Sports on Earth, Scout.com, the other thing that she just literally mentioned just now.
Comeback.
Yeah, the comeback, as it's known. And also the F-Ball NFL podcast at fball.podomatic.com. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show. One-word answer. Who is the more disappointing non-Browns Cleveland team, the Indians or the Cavaliers?
The Indians.
Ooh, yeah.
The Indians.
That's a good answer.
Especially because they also have a racist name, so you got to go against that. So.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Racist name and racist logo.
And racist logo.
And they're going to be the only team that wins a division in baseball without 90 wins.
That's crazy.
They can't reach 90 wins, and they're probably going to win the AL Central. So
that's sad. That's like the AFC South.
Yeah, thank the Minnesota Twins for that.
It's precisely, yeah.
The Minnesota Twins are the only team in baseball who has been already mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. So.
Oh, wow. That's unbelievable. I can't believe that. Wow.
There you go. It's been that kind of day. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show. I understand you've got a normal life to get back to. We'd love to have you back, especially now that you answered correctly on the non-football question. You have shown yourself to be a knowledgeable mind and a fantastic guest. So we can't wait to have you back on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. That was a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, that was fun. I don't know if this is
that was great.
I don't know if it's an apt comparison, but I feel like Andrea might be like the Kara Swisher of football.
Who is that?
so maybe not an apt comparison. Kara Swisher is a technology journalism giant who has made her trade on having some kind of weird insider access to the top level of Apple through like Yahoo through their last 3 CEOs. And also, yeah. So she's like the person to go to for scoops on Yahoo. But she's also really amazing on podcasts. And like she has this is like awesome home podcast studio, and she, does her thing, does the media rounds in the technology world and kills it just as hard as Andrea did.
Cool.
Also,
okay.
I like that.
Apt enough.
I like that Andrea's last name is Hangst. Like if hangry made you anxious.
That is also a thing.
So now that she's gone, I suppose we can at least briefly mention the Vikings. There wasn't a whole lot that happened this week. A lot of great photos of the stadium, though. I'll tell you what.
There's a lot of great photos of the stadium that, I don't know, they're like shot in a good light. I don't want to talk about the photos too much, but I'm just very excited about this stadium. Okay, so there's been a little bit of chatter on, Twitter and Facebook. It needs a nickname, right? Yeah, sure. Do you have any thoughts on a preferred nickname for us Bank Stadium? Yeah, well, so I've been thinking about this. So Andy wants to call it the USB. I think that's terrible. Some people want to call it the Bank. That makes sense, but we already have the Bank. That's TCF Bank Stadium. So I've been campaigning on that podcast, the Andy Lukery Football Machine, to call it the Vault, which I think that's pretty good, but I don't know how natural it is for it to catch on. Well, the great thing about calling it the Bank is there's that bank robbery movie that Sean Connery is in from the 90s, where he's like, and you can take that to the bank. That could be like the catchphrase for any cool thing that happens there. But I don't know. Those are all fine. I think we should call it... just like not responding to your Sean Connery bit. You're just like, all right. I think we should call it the glass case of emotion. That one doesn't really roll off the tongue, Dusty. Sure it does. Oh, well, now that you say so. Well, and the great thing about it is it sets up amazing player interviews. At the end of the same game. So Everson is in in the glass case of emotion. Exactly. At the end of the game, Everson Griffin can come up and be like, "I'm in a glass case of emotion," and then somebody from whatever team loses, because nearly all teams the Vikings play are destined to lose according to Vegas, especially in games at home. They can do the full Ron Burgundy like they're actually in the glass case of emotion. Like the same line works whether you win or you lose. And I think it appeals to a broad swath of the demographic that watches football. They're almost all... show me a football fan that hasn't seen Anchorman, and I'll show you a football fan that's like 9 years old. I thought you were going to say that's never lived. I mean, have 9-year-olds really lived that much? 9 years is a short time when you can only remember 2/3 of them. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I too discount the opinions of children. And that's actually a truth. I'm not even being sarcastic. I'm not digging at you, screw children. Well, and yet you continue to do this show with me, so. Hey-o. Our collective mileage may vary.
So the vault is where you're going with. I've never seen a vault made of glass. I'm not sold on that.
Well, but it's not glass.
But that's what makes the
It's like plastic.
The transparent dome of bird murder.
Well, okay, so here's the thing about the bird murdering. I was confused as to why the Vikings wouldn't pay $1 million to get the fritted glass that prevents bird murder. But I am actually kind of confident that they will be able to prevent bird murder with the current design, because it actually, the way the pseudo glass or whatever it is implemented in the stadium, it actually looks a lot like fritted glass. So I don't really see. I don't know if there's going to actually be bird murder.
I'm not convinced that the pollution and the noise will not birds are not as stupid as I think we're assuming. I mean, occasionally one crow flies into it.
Birds are really dumb, Dusty. They're mondo dumb.
All right.
Have you ever seen a bird ever? They're so dumb.
I've seen many birds. I've seen some of them do surprisingly dumb things, and some of them do surprisingly smart things. I just feel like the
ravens / crows or whatever, they don't count. Those are too smart.
Indeed.
Other birds dumb.
So birds are dumb. # hot take.
Hot take. Yeah. Well, I mean, what the stadium is supposed to be in some sort of migration pattern for these dumb birds. So that's supposed to be the issue.
The noise and the pollution will convince them to take a slightly different route. I imagine that they will be able to build that into their generational memory at some point after the Vikings have won a Super Bowl.
Okay. Whatever you say, bird murder apologist.
I'm not a bird murder apologist. I'm a bird apologist. I'm not apologizing for their murder. I believe that we can make birds great again.
This just reminds me of the Birds Right activist Twitter account. And wait, have you seen that one?
No. I won't look it up this minute because my mic is hot, but you can be assured that I will be doing that as soon as the show is done.
Fantastic. Are there non-bird related takes that we can go through on the show? Or are there is there another topic we can power through?
I'm so glad you asked. Harrison Smith just signed a doozy of a contract. It has
Did he?
more.
Never heard of him.
I don't know. He's some guy. I don't know. There was Andy actually posted a pretty doofy Little Harrison, Little John Harrison Smith, mashup, which I thought was cute, but it really
adorable, Andy.
Well, it really just brought into relief how little you see a player's face, and just who is that guy? Oh, that's Harrison Smith. I don't even know what our best player looks like. Oh God. So anyway,
well, that's pretty fair, I guess, especially because a safety is so far off the broadcast screen anyway. I mean, you don't get a lot of media exposure.
I know you barely see his helmet or his numbers, much less his face. But he's going to see a lot of Benjamins. He's got more guaranteed money than any other safety in NFL history in his contract. Is that accurate?
Sort of, not quite. So he actually only has $15.4 million, guaranteed. $10 million of that is in a signing bonus, so that's going to be prorated over 5 years. So if, for example, after the end of the second year of the contract, or the third year really of the contract, if you include this year, the Vikings don't want they have to cut him because he's suddenly bad or whatever. They're only responsible for $6 million to the dead space. So that's the signing bonus, and then the rest is he's got $5 million probably base salary this year guaranteed, which probably frees up a lot of salary cap room for the Vikings this year. Not relevant, except that they can roll it over to next year if they want. But he has another $14 million guaranteed for injury, which probably means that he's got a roster bonus that kicks in on March 6th or the third year of the league year next year. And so if the Vikings don't want him for, again, whatever reason, maybe someone sucks all the life energy out of him, Space Jam style. then they can cut him without any risk, without any of that guaranteed money, except for the signing bonus money kicking in. So they're in full control. But on like the second or third or fourth year of the next league year, he's going to have like another $14 million guaranteed. So that's not really a guarantee in the same way. Like Colin Kaepernick had the same structure where he had virtually all of his money guaranteed, and that's what was reported. But he didn't. He actually just had a guaranteed roster kick in at the beginning of every year. And I think that's what Harrison has. So he really doesn't have that much guaranteed money, but he is making more money currently than any other safety in the NFL, except for maybe Eric Berry, who's probably going to renegotiate his deal anyway, on a per-year basis.
Well, so, like, how much of this is... So Harrison Smith's agent is Brian Murphy, who has a long history working with the Vikings to get players who want to stay there, decent contracts. How much of this negotiation is, like, Harry Smith and the Vikings kind of agreeing on how to make this easy for each other, given the Vikings' future cap woes?
Well, it'll be interesting to see sort of what nature of those cap problems will be, because, I mean, we've been pretty happy with Rob Brzezinski structuring the Vikings cap. And I think that they're taking into account the fact that Matt Khalil won't be will be under contract next year. Adrian Peterson won't be under contract next year. And that's $30 million that you have the ability to play with, and that'll allow you to do things like, extend Xavier Rhodes, extend, some of these other players. And that, I think, is sort of the key. You might not even have Brian Robinson, next year. And I don't know. I think that's $6 million. So I think actually the Vikings are probably, without, sort of looking at, a sheet, are probably in a pretty good cap situation because of that. And Brzezinski's been very, very good at, like, designing the cap. You probably don't have to worry about Captain Munnerlyn. If you do, that's probably a good thing, because that means he's playing extremely well. And so... I wouldn't necessarily worry about it that much, especially because the Vikings are in full control of Harrison Smith's contract and have the ability to sort of manipulate that cap. And I secretly suspect that they load up some players in 1 year and load up on some players in another year of that contract, so that, like, the big money years for those contracts just happen at different times.
Just happen to alternate, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can front load a lot of these contracts. I don't think the Vikings are doing that, but they have enough cap room to front load some of these contracts, so they don't have to worry about cap problems later on down the road, and the player also gets all the cash in hand that they want and stuff like that.
So we asked Andrea right before she took off about the things that separate well-run organizations from poorly run organizations. I'm getting the impression just from this brief segment that the Vikings are pretty savvy about how they organize their cap and their contracts in order to keep, their obligations pretty similar from year to year, while also, like, trying to attract more and more talent, whether it's young talent or veteran talent. Does that seem accurate to you?
Yeah, no, I think this is one of the few advantages that the Vikings have consistently had year by year. They've had, like, a lot of missteps in evaluation. They've had a lot of coaching problems. They've had a lot of, like, structural problems, the way the organization has been designed. But I think that consistently they have been a very good team in terms of managing the cap. And I say that as someone who's, like, consistently criticized some individual contracts, like the Adrian Peterson contract, the Jared Allen contract, etc. I think that that's one of the things that you need for a good organization to say, stay good.
Well, that seems to be something that if, there's discipline, then that makes it so much easier to plan further into the future, because, you're not waiting for 2 years for, a giant, like, bubble in your salary situation to burst, or you're not, trying to spend a bunch of money because otherwise you won't be paying, some of your veterans enough or whatever. Like, it just seems like good long-term management. And
I think sort of the opposite might be happening in Miami, despite the fact that Spielman kind of, came from Miami, but also, like, Don Aponte is supposed to be this great cap negotiator, but, like, the contracts that they've signed down there are pretty, like I mean, Ndamukong Suh's contract alone are pretty problematic from the perspective of like long-term salary cap management. I think the Giants are about to go through that problem too. What with the absurd amount of money that they gave players like Olivier Vernon and Janoris Jenkins. And we saw what happens when you get into that kind of cap trouble with Oakland right before Reggie McKenzie arrived. And what he had to do in order to deal with all these contracts is cut everybody, take a huge dead space cap hit, make the team just awful, just abysmal for at least 1 year. It ended up being something like 2 years, actually. But they just couldn't handle all the contract weight. So they had dead space over 2 years, $40-50 million of dead space where they couldn't sign players because of that. And so they just sacrificed 2-3 years in order to get out of it. And that took a GM with a lot of balls and a really good GM, too. Reggie McKenzie's built a pretty good team in Oakland at this point, and they're managing the cap a lot differently. So when you have those teams that don't manage their cap effectively, you have to have like sort of these moments where you just have to give up on a couple of years. And while the Vikings have had those moments, it has never been like cap-related reasons. It's been like, in 2010, everybody was old. Like that's a different problem, which, by the way, not a problem right now. I think that's one of the things that makes good teams continue to stay good. New England's a great example. I think Seattle's doing a surprisingly good job managing their cap despite what looked to be, forthcoming cap problems. We've been predicting forthcoming cap problems for them for the past 2 years. Haven't had it. I think that that's another organizational aspect. At least the Vikings have covered for now.
Excellent. Then let us go on to the one mailbag question worth answering that we did not answer during the show. ZenCupid at ZenDBP on Twitter writes us, how much Kool-Aid should we drink over the gushing Teddy reviews at today's OTAs? Teddy Bridgewater, apparently even Mike Zimmer was convinced that Teddy was throwing the deep ball better, really letting it go, keeping that elbow up and really just letting it fly.
I wouldn't read too much into it. Like if Teddy cruises through OTAs and has a really good, OTAs or whatever, based on reports, based on Mike Zimmer, that may move the needle for me in a positive direction. Of course, I'm already high on Teddy, so who knows? But my confidence in him won't really have changed significantly much more than it already has this offseason based off of some of the research that I've done and some of the second looks that I've taken at Teddy. Because it's OTAs, right? I remember a couple of years ago, people were talking about Aaron Rodgers struggling at OTAs. It turns out he was doing that on purpose to sort of test what he could do and what he couldn't do. I remember, Drew Brees struggling at OTAs not too long ago as well. And I remember, every quarterback that's been bad has had a good OTA too. I'm not implying there's a reverse correlation, by the way, either. I mean, I've heard, Tom Brady is having excellent OTAs. Who cares? So I would sort of restrain my enthusiasm, but I will say this. The OTA highlight videos that I saw, which, by the way, they're highlight videos, don't read too much into them. Insofar as we have the ability to take a look at a quarterback's throwing motion, this deep into the offseason, I would say, mechanically, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's probably good, but it looks a lot easier for him to throw the ball. If you does that make sense? He's throwing the ball really naturally, and it looks a lot easier than I remember it being during the season.
Like a more comfortable, faster release, that sort of thing?
Your mic just cut out, so I have no idea what you said.
Okay. In 3.
And I still can't hear you if you're saying stuff.
Okay. Then
there you
I'm back. Here I am. Back in 3, 2, 1. So it's like a faster release, more comfortable release sort of thing.
It might be a faster release. I don't know because I haven't looked at it. I don't want to look too deeply. They're highlight videos. But I noticed that it's more comfortable. Yeah, and it just feels like the ball's coming out of his hands a lot more naturally. If I wanted to look a little bit deeper, I would say that probably the speed, the velocity of the ball hasn't changed much. And really, the point of the release is. The discussion that people are having about his release is less to do with velocity and more about accuracy. I obviously cannot judge that from highlights, but it's an easy, simple, unlabored-looking throwing motion. And I remember at times during the season, it looked like it took a lot more effort. And that's that sounds like a meaningless observation, and it might be. But I don't think it is, in general, for a quarterback's throwing motion to look unlabored. I don't know if it means anything this deep into the offseason, but it's just something I wanted to share. It definitely looks more comfortable. I think that's a good way to put it.
Well, and dude, I've been harping on this the whole season last year, and as much as I can in the offseason. And maybe I should start a blog or something, because I feel like it's not really getting that much, as much traction as it deserves. But just the idea that, Teddy suffered so much last year from running NFC North winning season behind a line of backups. And we have such great starters in our line, and I feel like most people are not properly undervaluing Sully and especially now coming in with Aaron Boone. Our offensive line is going to look so much different than it did last season. And Teddy managed to put together a pretty impressive performance behind, that line of backups. And I mean, this is going to be a much different, much better Vikings team if we can get a starter to see the field on week 1.
Right. No, yeah, I think so. Obviously it's a little bit dependent on John Sullivan's progress being as good as it's being reported. Obviously, asterisk on all off-season coverage in terms of whether or not players feel good. So that is going to matter. And I think that, and here's the thing: a lot of people praise Joe Berger's performance, this last season, and they should. He played really well, but I think that the holistic effects of line play, a lot of that has to do with the center, and I think that John Sullivan did a better job managing the rest of the line. So I think Berger did a really good job on his individual assignments, but I think Sullivan did a phenomenal job sort of managing the assignments of everyone. And I think that's going to be really important. We're going to have to see, Matt Kalil's having his first surgery-free offseason since his rookie year. Maybe you can read into that if you want. It makes sense to, but it's difficult to put faith in the guy. But you're right. I mean, they've got a left guard who isn't garbage, right? Alex Boone is potentially one of the better left guards in the league, and now the Vikings have him. They've got John Sullivan, etc. They're going to have probably a good right guard. I really like what Mike Harris did. I like that Brandon Fusco switching back to the right side. Whoever emerges is either going to be Mike Harris, who was good last year, or better than Mike Harris, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm reasonably confident in the right tackle. So I think that the offensive line is going to be a little bit better, it only needs to be not garbage. You're right, they were playing against a line of backups. I have a piece up on PDST.com about that isolates how bad the Vikings offensive line was compared to the rest of the league. The amount of pressure, once you adjust for opponent, things really change. The amount of pressure that the Vikings line gave up was, I think, the most in the NFL. Is 46%. And following that, it was Seattle and San Diego and Indianapolis. But they were all pretty close to each other. But once you adjust for opponent, once you adjust for how well opponents put pressure on offensive lines, it was by far the worst. The distance between first and second, so between Vikings and Seattle, between 1 and 2, is the same as the distance between number 2 and number 16. So the Vikings offensive line was just abysmal last year. So if it gets a little bit better, if it's the third worst offensive line, that's actually a huge leap in terms of its ability, and I think that'll have some pretty good ramifications for the offense without any improvement from Teddy. I think Teddy is going to improve. So I'm pretty excited about how the offense is going to change. You always have to ask questions like, how's Adrian Peterson fitting into the offense? Is Laquan Treadwell doing what he needs to do? What's expected of him as a first-round pick? Is Teddy fixing? Is the deep ball actually getting more accurate, or is that just practice stuff? That kind of stuff.
Well, and that's something that we will surely belabor in the time between now and the season, but we won't truly know.
Right. Yeah, we just won't know.
So I think that's about it, unless there's any specific news items that I didn't put in the rundown that you wanted to cover.
I don't. I mean, it's the off season. There's not a bunch to talk about. The Harrison Smith contract. I also did some statistical work over at coldomaha.com that'll link in the show notes about why Harrison Smith, statistically speaking, might be the best safety in the NFL. Very caveat, extremely difficult to use advanced statistics to evaluate safeties. So take all of those statistics in that piece with boulders of salt. But the returns statistically are very, very positive for Harrison Smith. So I'm very happy about that. We'll like that. A lot of it has to do with, rating and coverage. A lot of that has to do with his ability in the run and stuff like that. And why someone who is as versatile and as successful against both the run and the pass is pretty unique in today's NFL. And there's some Pro Football Focus stuff in there too, which is not quite advanced statistics, but it's it's something else. Has anything else happened? I mean, I know. Oh, we should mention this actually. The charity that the Vikings blogs are all doing, More Than Words 2016. Last year, they raised their goal for the Chad Greenway Foundation. This time, they're going for the Mike Zimmer Foundation. They've got a really ambitious goal this time: $10,000 for the Mike Zimmer Foundation. And they've already raised $2,200 as of the last time I've checked. I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. The Mike Zimmer Foundation, obviously, it's got Mike Zimmer's name attached, and he's very strongly behind it. But it's a well-run organization. It sponsors football camps. It sponsors scholarships, and it also highlights excellent students from across the state. So it's a way to get children involved both academically and inside football, and they do some pretty great work. So. We'll get a link to that in the show notes. Totally forgot in the last show to talk about it, but that's something that we're pretty excited about. Also, real quick, Teddy Bridgewater is going to be on Family Feud. I'm probably not going to watch that because it's Family Feud, but that's like a thing. Yeah, that's about it.
Well, excellent. We're slightly under time, so let me complain for a second just how terrible the Minnesota Twins are. What a god-awful embarrassment to any sport, from top to bottom, from players to farm system to ownership. The only people doing a good job that are related to the Twins are the bloggers that are covering them. Luckily, we have people like Ted Schwartz and Aaron Gleeman to show us all the ways that the Twins are historically bad. Eduardo Nunez has had 2 seasons in his Major League career where he has not even hit 2 home runs. And he hit 2 home runs in tonight's game. That makes him the Minnesota Twins' best player by a long shot. They're all hitting like garbage. They're all fielding like garbage. It's a colossal. And the worst thing is that almost a month ago, Terry Ryan came out with all the front office goons and was like, "Yeah, we stink. We take full responsibility." And yet, no one's gotten fired. A bunch of the wrong players have been sent down to the minors. We haven't even tried to trade any of our, decent players. We haven't even tried to trade Eduardo Nunez. We haven't even tried to trade Miguel Sano, which, keep in mind, for 4 or 5 years.
Is it? Well, so who are the players that they should keep because they're young and developmental, and who are the players that they should just get rid of? Because it's obviously a lost season. Presumably they've got some talent. So is Miguel Sano, one of those players that you think could garner trade value, probably just assets to be named, or some minor league developmental prospects, or what?
Well, so Sano was the Twins have been following him since high school, and there was so much hype surrounding him. At this point, with the entire Twins team, anyone who has an OPS above 650, trade him. Get whatever you can for him. Just get anyone else on this team, and if there's a way that we could get...
Isn't Sano the kind of guy... I don't know anything about baseball, so just tell me I'm wrong. But isn't Sano the kind of guy that you would trade for if you're in the same situation as the Twins? He's 23.
Yes, but Twins are in a situation where they can get value from guys like him and potentially fill positions of need with Nunez and maybe a couple of other guys, maybe a minor league trade or whatever. There's an opportunity for the Twins to, cash in on a prospect that still seems. Here's the problem: if some of these young guys stay with the Twins for a couple more years, because the Pohlads aren't going anywhere, Terry Ryan isn't going anywhere, even after total system failure, which is what Terry Ryan described what was happening to his team. Even after total system failure, nothing different is being done. They're still rocking the same exact management style. This is totally the the dog in the burning kitchen, this is fine cartoon. In slow motion. In slow motion. And Paul Molitor and Terry Ryan are terrible managers. They're trying to bring Ron Gardenhire back in to manage the farm system, which is somehow an even worse idea than having him coach the team, because then he's not only just like damaging the present, but he's like doing damage to the future. And these like, without a management change, the Twins will never be good. But if these like talented players stay with the Twins, then not only are they going to not excel because they're going to be surrounded by a team that can't field and can't hit, but they're never going to have...
Important? Is that important?
They're not as important as pitching, but they are two of the three key things that happen in baseball, it turns out.
Oh, okay.
And the Twins aren't even that good at pitching either. But, like, right. So it's just like the situation with Ryan Fitzpatrick and the Jets. Or DeMarco Murray and the Eagles. It's like if you hang around with a team that is determined to lose and apologize passive-aggressively for losing, which is a very Minnesota thing to do,
right?
Then your trade stock is eventually going to disappear. And then, it's Kevin Love all over again. It's a talented player who will go literally anywhere to get away from the culture of losing. And the Twins have a culture of losing.
Oh, okay. So that's actually, I had not considered that. When is his contract up?
That's a good question. I do not have the answer to that at my fingertips. This was I did not prepare for this rant. It just sort of happened organically.
Dusty, God damn it. Okay. Well, I mean, like, I don't know anything about baseball, so that's just stuff. I'm actually fascinated by this conversation. Like, this seems like very Philadelphia 76ers what you're proposing. I don't know how popular it is among Twins bloggers, how, like, Moneyball it is, but, like, I remember the 76ers would have a good asset, and then they would trade the asset that was a known good quantity for multiple potentially good assets, banking on the idea they would get out of, let's say, the 4 draft picks or whatever that they got from the known good asset, they would probably get 2 pretty good assets, and that outweighs the value of having the known good asset. Like, is that kind of what you're proposing, that trading Miguel Sano, a known young good quantity, will allow you to get multiple shots at having other known, like, you end up having more good players as a result? Is that like the idea?
Well, exactly. And plus you have the benefit of maybe being able to go to a team like the Yankees, and God bless the Yankees. They kill us in the playoffs every year, and then all our talented players end up there, and they are happy to, like, swap half their farm team with us. But, like, 3 of their guys almost lined up, like, all in a row, like former Twins tonight. But it was only for a lack of Anthony Swarzak that did not happen. But, like, the Yankees would be interested in a guy like Sano, and they could trade us any number of, talented veterans at any position. I mean, remember when, maybe you don't, but last year when everybody went nuts because we were all going to be treated to the glory of Torrey Hunter's leadership again? And that maybe gave us like 3 wins above not having him, or 5 wins above not having him.
Didn't someone mention recently, like, the reason the Twins are at this historically poor streak is they're missing Torrey Hunter's leadership?
Yeah,
I mean, that's the difference between the 2 squads, right?
Whoever said that was trolling. But
some people said it while trolling. Some people may not have.
Well, okay, in Torrey Hunter's specific case, whatever. But I am receptive to the idea that we can trade, this young talent and potentially get it overvalued, because what are they going to do playing for the Twins, really? And maybe swap them out for a veteran in a similar position with some experience that can come in and be a clubhouse leader.
Okay, that's a good point. A. B, Judd just tweeted out, Eduardo Nunez's production should send him to the All-Star game. It also means the Twins should send him elsewhere.
Well, yeah, exactly.
That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's fire sale time. It's time for, like just how a few years ago the Oakland Raiders declared draft bankruptcy. or salary cap bankruptcy, and just, bailed on all that. Just like, all right, we're just going to consign ourselves to, sucking for a couple of years. Like the Twins have just been living with that mentality for years, and it permeates the entire front office. Like, I'm not convinced that Paul Molitor or Terry Ryan ever care if the Twins are a winning team, which is a terrible thing to say because they've both been members of the organization since back when the Twins won, 2 World Series in 4 years. And without somebody like, ever since total system failure, which is just such a, I love that phrase and I love that press conference. Because
it sounds like, because I've been seeing that phrase a lot too. It sounds like that is the kind of phrase that'll end up becoming part of Twins lore, Twins fan lore for like years to come.
Well, yeah, the Jim Pohlad stood there next to Terry Ryan and Paul Molitor and said that the season so far has been total system failure.
Wait, Pohlad said that?
Yeah.
Oh my God! How were they not fired on the spot?
Well, because the Minnesota Twins are the biggest friggin' old boys club that loves mediocrity more than any other team I've ever seen in any sport. They crave mediocrity. They would like
mediocrity is what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes or whatever. But no, it was May 6th. The Twins were 0-9 to start the season and were 6-20 when Jim Pohlad was like, "This is embarrassing. This was supposed to be our year. Like, we put together a decent season with Torrey Hunter last year, better than we should have. But this was our year. Like, a lot of our young guys were supposed to be coming up and supposed to be like playing at a professional level, and instead there was a bunch of shuffles between the pro team and AAA. Like, now. Okay,
so that organization, so that shuffle, was that engineered by Gardy?
No, this is before there were even rumors of Gardy becoming involved with the team again. This was all Terry Ryan, the GM, and Paul Molitor, the coach.
Okay, well, because I'm just like curious about like bringing Gardy back, like what that accomplishes, like in theory, not like what that fact that it doesn't accomplish anything.
Striving for mediocrity is the only reason you would ever bring Gardy back. That's the reason we fired him.
What is the reason they would give the press for bringing him back?
Because he's been a valued member of the Twins organization for decades.
Oh, he's a Michigan man. Got it.
So get this. So May 6th, the Twins are 6-20. Jim Pohlad, total system failure. No one gets fired. A bunch of players get shuffled around back and forth between AAA and the majors and, some other smaller minor league movements. None of it really makes a difference because June 6th, the Twins are 8-20. Or excuse me, 16-40.
Yeah, they won like 10 more games.
Yeah, they slightly improved on their miserable losing record.
All right, did you get it all out of your system?
Just so embarrassing. Like, talk about bad management. The Browns got nothing on the Minnesota Twins. And that is all the, like, this was my baseball doldrums rant for the year. The Twins are no longer worth watching. I'm over it. As of now, it's 49 days until training camp.
All right.
Okay. So that's going to do it for North Code 135. Joining us this week was Andrea Hengst. Make sure you check out the F-Ball podcast and her work on Sports on Earth, Scout.com, and I keep forgetting the last one. Oversight? No, that's what I did.
No, the comeback.
The comeback, yes. That's what you do. Is you come back with the correct. It's
good save.
It's a joke. Yeah. Thank you so much to our dedicated listenership for pushing our listener numbers up every week in the off season. During the show, I got a text from a friend of mine who's at the North Dakota Democratic Caucus, and
the North Dakota Democratic Farmer Labor Caucus.
Yeah, the DFL caucus.
It's a different party, Dusty. Jeez.
Whatever. That's
okay. Go on.
At any rate. This person texted me to mention, or to ask him, rather, if I had come up with a particular turn of phrase on Norse code, which I had not, but we are We are what passes for famous in the Midwest, it sounds like. Plus, we also like it when you give us a couple of bucks because, it's hard out there for a media company nowadays. We can't all go work for Star Tribune or K-Fan or whatever. We don't get these ludicrously juicy radio contracts, which I'm sure all actual radio people are laughing at. The very idea of that being a thing.
Right.
All this so much money in working in radio. Well, it turns out there isn't any money in it unless you are both a creator of content and an entrepreneur. And, one of the sad things about the democratization of media today is that it makes it harder to find truly good content. But the best thing about it is that if you see that there is a lack of good content in a field where you excel or someone excels, then the tools exist for you to make that content. And all you have to do is find an audience, get them to support you, and get them to, start contributing to your cause. And then everybody's happy. People get to do real journalism. People get to do real analysis. And those who are interested in such things get to hear it or see it or otherwise experience it. And that, to me, cutting out this middleman of classified ads or, great big circulars in a dead tree paper or whatever, just, giving a few bucks directly to the people that make the really good stuff is it's the future, whether we like it or not. And I'm really glad that I get to work on a show where we have the kind of listeners who will contribute to an outstanding product. I mean, I believe our product is outstanding. I don't know about you.
I mean, I've been led to believe it is an outstanding product.
You are not dissatisfied enough to quit yet.
No, this is maybe my favorite project that I've been involved with over the past several years. So I don't even care if it's an outstanding product. I have a bunch of time, but I have a bunch of fun on the show. But I do think the work that we do is pretty great.
So if you think that too, then please stop by paypal.me/NorseCode or patreon.com/NorseCode and either flip us a couple of bucks or become a recurring contributor. Beyond that, we can be found on the Daily Norseman blog, which hosts all of our episodes, and facebook.com/Daily Norseman. Please be sure to check out all that stuff. And until we return for Arif Hassan and Andrea Hengst, I'm Dusty O'Connell. Our formula is this: keep Teddy alive, and we'll see you next week. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.